So just a warm welcome to everyone for joining us this morning for another Nature Kids Fun Virtual Explore Day. My name is Caitlin Bassat, and I'm the Provincial Network Coordinator with Nature Kids BC. And I'm a third-generation European settler that's joining you this morning from Kamloops to Sept, also known as Kamloops. Before I begin, I'd like to emphasize how grateful we are to live, play, and carry out our work in British Columbia, which is Indigenous land. There are over 200 First Nation communities in BC, and do you know which community you are connected to or joining us from this morning? Warm welcome to all of you, families, kids. I know we've got some of our wonderful volunteers on the call this morning. Thanks so much for joining us. And if you're not a member with us, we encourage you to join us. It's of course free for families, and you can find out more on our website, which I'll post later. If you're just joining us, again, you can mention in the chat where you're joining us from. And if you have questions during the presentation today, Gary will be answering questions at the end of the presentation, and you can just pop those in the chat. And also, if you have your passport to nature this morning, this counts as one Explore Day or adventure, so you can fill that out. And just a reminder, you can take those to Explore Days and get them signed. And when you have your passport filled out, you can either email us a photo of it or you can mail it to us, and then we'll send you a prize. And it's at this time that I'm really excited to introduce Gary R. Allen. Now, Gary has been conducting wolf education since 2006 to schools, community groups, and many First Nation schools and organizations. The Wolfman owns and operates the Swell Wolf Education Center in Nanaimo, BC. So please welcome Gary.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. It's great to be here. And what I'm gonna talk about this morning is about the coastal wolves. I don't know if you can just look over my right shoulder, and you'll see Tundra. That was the wolf. She was 90% wolf that I took into the schools. Over 300 in BC, and over 40,000 students, along with many community presentations and that. So anyway, that is Tundra there. So okay, let's talk about coastal wolves. Many of you may have seen the Netflix series, The Island of the Sea Wolves. So I just want to correct some stuff there. First of all, they're not sea wolves. They're coastal wolves. And the reason they're not sea wolves is because the First Nations have already called another animal the sea wolf, and that's the orca, or what you may know as the killer whale. And so if you think about it, sea wolf, well, they're like wolves on the land. And a number of the First Nation creation stories that they are created, it's the whale to the sea wolf or the orca. The orca then comes onto the land, becomes the wolf, and from then the wolf turns into the human. So we know that sea wolves live in a pod, wolves live in a pack. Sea wolves, cooperatively raise their offspring, and also cooperatively hunt, much like the wolves do as well. So so we'll call them coastal wolves, and if you can refrain calling them sea wolves, then we'll get that corrected from the inaccuracy of the Netflix series. What I want to say is that the coastal wolves are a evolutionary significant unit of the subspecies of the gray wolf in BC, and that is Canis lupus nubilis is a subspecies in BC. So the coastal wolves are not a separate subspecies. They're contained within that nubilis subspecies. And you can start to see some of the pictures of the coastal wolves, and you can see that they generally have a different color than the gray wolf. You'll see a bit more kind of brown or orangish tinge to them, and it's believed that that's because of the marine diet that they have. The range of the coastal wolves actually go from Ucluelet all up the west coast of Vancouver Island, over onto the mainland of BC up through the Great Bear Rainforest, and also into the Alaska Panhandle, so the southeast part of Alaska. So you can see that they have a large range. Now, Raincoast Foundation, they did, I think it's Raincoast Conservation Foundation, they did a study of the coastal wolves in the late 1900s, so 1998, 99 and that. And they wanted to involve the First Nations people in the area that they were doing, which was around Bella Bella, so that's the Helsik people. And there was a Helsik member, his name was Chester Starr. He was known as Low Wolf because he spent a lot of his time out in the islands and that on his own and with the wolves. So when they said to Chester, we want to study the wolves, and he said, well, which ones do you want to study? Do you want to study the coastal wolves or the interior wolves? And the two biologists, one of which had many, many years experience studying wolves, and the other one was his the protege. And they said, well, what do you mean? And he says, well, there's the coastal wolves, and they live primarily on the islands here, and when they disperse from their natal pack, so that's the pack that they're born into. So around 2 years of age is when wolves generally leave the natal pack and go off to establish their own territory, their own pack. Well, they go north-south. They go up and down the coast on the islands. Now, they're great swimmers, so they can swim 8 to 12 kilometers in open ocean water. So they obviously are able to endure that cold. They swim with the tides or the currents to make it easier. But they don't migrate or disperse eastward into the interior of BC and like Bella Coola and the Anarco River and places like that. So when they did some genetic testing of these coastal wolves, and that what they found was they were really quite pure, the genetic material, which is unusual. There's in the interior of BC and other areas of North America, there's generally a mixture of different wolves. Like, you'll find some Arctic wolf genetic material even in the wolves that are in the prairies of Canada and into like northern Minnesota. So when the geneticist from UCLA was doing this this genetic material study, she was really quite shocked at the purity of the genetic material. In fact, she redid her tests and found out the same conclusions. And when you think about it, they live in a strip of land, much like if you know the country of Chile, it's that long strip north-south. So the wolves can't go any further west because you got the Pacific Ocean. They don't go much into the at all into the interior, and that because you got the coastal mountains, and then so they go north-south, and that has really sort of kept them very genetically pure. The other thing that you'll find about the coastal wolves, Raincoast, when they did their study, found like 25% of the wolves were black, and you can see, you maybe saw on a few of the pictures there that there's some black in them, and later on you're going to see a full black wolf. And wolves that have black in them actually have a dog gene in them, so they're part dog, if we can say that. And what it is, it's a mutation of a gene, the K locus gene, that when dogs, came from wolves, the dogs retained this K locus gene. And then when the Europeans came over to North America, of course, they brought their dogs. And as they mated with some of the wolves, then you get this full black coat and that. So that's a bit of the sort of introduction of the wolves. So we're going to see their habitat. I was out in Ucluelet on September the 18th, 19th, and we did a couple float plane tours. So Caitlin's going to show you some of the habitat that I recorded from the float plane. So you can see that it's along the beaches. It's into the Pacific Ocean there. There's a bay, so you can see a bit of a kind of a wetland just coming up there in the coast and that. So it's fairly remote, even though what you're seeing is between Ucluelet and Tofino, and there's like 1 million visitors a year in that area. You can start to see how dense the forest is and the shoreline. So again, I mentioned the islands, and you'll see some islands coming up. They will swim amongst the islands, and they're great swimmers. So they, that's just the habitat that they live in. They can be pretty hard to see. We did this tour. We did 2 float plane trips. On Thursday, September 19th, we did one from 2:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon because the fog and the clouds have burned off, so we could get up in the air. And then we did one at 6 o'clock to 7. And the reason for that is because it was low tide and we were going to be able to see things and that. So on this trip, at 2:30 to 3:30, we actually saw 3 black bears on the beach that you can see. And then in the evening, we actually saw over 10 black bears on the beach. And the pilot, who's been flying out there for about 3 years, said that was the most black bears he'd seen on one trip. And it's interesting, that the one of the biologists in that from Parks Canada said that their study has shown that there's about 100 black bears in the Pacific Rim Park, and in fact, there's more black bears than there is deer. So anyway, that's what the habitat they live in. So what other animals are in that habitat, that landscape, their territory that they eat? So Parks Canada, again, in around 2014, did a study of collecting the scat of wolves, which, for people that don't know the technical words of scat, it's wolf poop. And what they do is they analyze that. So they had about 300 scat, which is not a bad sample in a small area. And what they did was when they analyzed it, they found that the river otter at around 30% was the most that animal that they found in all the scat, and followed then by the deer, followed then by harbor seals, and last was raccoon. So that made up their diet. Recently, because Parks Canada is doing a 5-year study called Wild About Wolves, and I'll be sending 3 lovely YouTube video links to Caitlin that she can share with you, and you can find out about the First Nations connection to the wolves out there. Anyway, They redid this study, and they actually asked volunteers to collect wolf scat and that. So they got a number of samples, and so they analyzed them. And so the four top ones are the raccoon is number one now, which it was number four in the previous study. Deer is number two, so that's consistent. Um, and that number three was the harbor seal, and number four was black bear. So the wolves will kill the black bear, and they will eat it. So they were quite amazed at that finding from the scat. All right. Now, when we were out there when we were flying, we knew the chance of seeing seeing a coastal wolf was pretty remote. They're pretty elusive animals. Um, the best time, if you're going to see them is low tide. So there are semi-diurnal tides on the west coast, meaning there's two low tides in a 24-hour period and two high tides. Excuse me, I got an itchy nose there. So the the low tide is when you're going to see them, because they're going to come out foraging on the beach looking for some marine mammals. They'll eat like crabs and mussels, and they'll look under rocks to see what there is. If they're really lucky, there may be, so they could come out and get the seal pups. If a sea lion dies and washes up on shore, they'll eat that. And I've seen pictures of where they're eating a whale, like a gray whale that's died and shown up on shore. So that area that I talked about, from like Ucluelet all the way up the west coast of Vancouver Island, through the Great Bear Rainforest and into the Alaska Panhandle, that's fairly remote territory. Most of it is First Nation villages, such as like a Hauset, Cayucet, and then Bella Bella, Klemtu, Hartley Bay, and that as we go up the coast. And but there's still a lot of threats to the coastal wolves. There's not much hunting of them, and as far as I know, there's virtually no trapping of them, because the pelts are pretty worthless as to trap and to sell them. But there's both industrial and recreational activity on Vancouver Island and the coast through the Great Bear Rainforest. There's still, there's fish farms that are there, and the people that are working on the fish farms. There's logging, and then there's, the people that recreate out there, the kayakers, for example, or hikers. So on Nook Island, there's the trail, the Nook Island Trail. There's a lot of hikers. So they're going into the coastal wolf territory, just like the kayakers. So my wife and I did about 15 years ago, did a kayak trip with a company around Vargas Island. Vargas Island is just north of Tofino. And there was a lovely bay there called a House Bay. It's a big sandy beach. That was the first night that we stayed. A couple actually saw some coastal wolves just in the interface between the seagrass and the forest. I pitched my tent, and when I woke up at about 4:30, 4:45, to walk the beach, there were wolf prints all around my tent, and I didn't hear them. That's how quiet they are. So kayakers are they're a nuisance. If you see it from the wolf's perspective. When I was kayaking, I'm sleeping in their territory, and they wolves don't want to have contact with humans. So the fact that I'm on their island, and I'm thinking I'm doing kind of an environmentally friendly activity, yes, but I'm in their territory, and that so again, we just have to be mindful of that and not to try to habituate them and disturb their territory where they live on that landscape. All right. So let's talk about kayakers. So Caitlin's going to show you a clip here. And this is on Vargas Island. Okay. So this is done on a trail camera set up at nighttime. As you can see, it's dark. And you can see these couple wolves getting into the holds of the kayak, and they can cut through that nylon webbing that straps the holds down. They can chew that off in about 30 seconds. And given that wolves can smell their prey 2 kilometers, 2 miles away, if you've got food in that hold, they're going to smell it. And what happened was there were kayakers that were feeding these wolves hot dogs way back in around 2002, 2003. And there was a group of kayakers from UVic that were out there, and they were feeding them. And one of the kayakers, when he was sleeping, the wolf came up and bit him on the head. He's looking for food. They habituated these wolves to human food. And so what they did, because that's part of a BC park on Vargas Island, they convinced the Parks Branch to put caches up in the trees. And so if you were a kayaker, you took your food and put it up in the tree. And what happened is the wolves learned that there was no more food in the kayaks, so they didn't bother checking out the kayaks or the people. They went back to hunting, for their traditional food, the ones that I've talked about that they found in the scat. So when we don't habituate them, then they do their natural behavior. When we do habituate them, you can see when we change our behavior, that changes the wolf's behavior, and they go and they they go back and hunt their traditional food. And there's another picture here of a black wolf on Vargas Island. And there it is there. Now, this picture was sent to me by a lady from Quebec who was vacationing on Vargas Island. There was a small resort. And the owner of the resort, it was believed that he was feeding the wolves, and that because it was that he could say, oh well, there's wolves, and you'll see wolves on the island, and so that's the wrong thing to do. So this lady was staying at the resort, walking on the beach there, and this wolf, and notice it's all black. Okay, remember I talked about it having that K. Lucas gene, so from the dog, and it approached her, which is really unnatural wolf behavior. Wolves don't want to have contact with humans, and you can see she came up and visited me when I lived at the north end of Vancouver Island, and she shared this picture in a email that she sent me, and she said it just kept approaching her, and of course what she did was she made a whole bunch of noise and whatever, which is what you do with wolves, and eventually it saw that she wasn't going to feed it, so it turned around and left. Um, but it was a bit worrying to her. I think she said it got within about 20, 25 feet of her, which is too close. And that, so you can see the damage we do when we habituate them. And so the Netflix series is, yes, it's lovely to see the coastal wolves, but I have a lot of issues with the Netflix series. First of all, for the ones that saw it, they put a remote camera right where the wolf den was, and they did that apparently about 6 months before the pups are born. The pups are born generally at the end of March, April, so they did this. They set up that camera, in October, November. That is really unethical because now these wolves know that that camera is there, and it's human interference into their territory, and they will switch their dens if they feel that there's too much human interference. And it's unfortunate because those dens can be used generation after generation. The other thing that happens with the Netflix series, because there's so much interest in people wanting to see the coastal wolves. I had a couple from Hawaii that were going out to the Pacific Rim, and I live in Nanaimo, so they stopped off. She actually made the appointment to see me a year before they were coming, and her and her husband spent about an hour and a bit, talking to me. And I said, well, the likelihood of you seeing them is very remote, but be really, really respectful and not, habituating them, because even photographers trying to get pictures of them and going into their territory, that's an habituation. So the Netflix series, has generated a lot of interest. There's people from England that are coming out and signing up with the ecotourism companies to see the coastal wolves. And one of the videos that I'll send, Caitlin, that is one of the elders from the Toquat Nation, which is just near the coastline of Ucluelet. And the First Nations people will say, and he does, you should not go out there to take pictures of them, because when you do that, it actually habituates them. And this is happening in Yellowstone National Park, where there's a lot of people that are standing on the roads with their high-powered zoom lenses and that taking pictures. And so when the wolves from Yellowstone leave the park, and that they get shot by other people who've got high-powered zooms, but they're attached to a rifle, and they don't know the difference between somebody looking at them with a zoom lens on a rifle as compared to people just wanting to view them and take pictures of them with the camera. So, let's be really respectful of these coastal wolves. We share their territory, and that we go into their territory, but let's not habituate them. So with that, Caitlin, I think I've probably talked enough, and maybe it's generated some questions, and I'm happy to to be able to provide hopefully some decent answers to their questions.
Thanks, Gary. That was great. I learned some new things, which is awesome. But yeah, if anyone has a question for Gary, just pop it in the chat and I can share that with the group. I know there's a bunch of us here from the interior today, and we're not close to the ocean, but I always remind myself that a lot of our waterways flow into the ocean eventually. So whatever we do here actually impacts all the critters that are surviving off the ocean. So just a good reminder when we're, visiting salmon runs in our areas, that everything that happens up here is impacting our coastal environments as well, including the wolves. I'll just wait a couple more minutes for questions if anyone has any. So Theo has a question. Is what you have to do when you see a wolf the same as when you see a coyote?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, first of all, you're going to see more coyotes than you're going to see wolves. I think, Theo, I think you were from Vancouver, if I saw that right. And of course, we know that there's coyotes, in Stanley Park and all throughout Vancouver, Burnaby, and some of the other areas, the lower mainland, as well as other areas of BC. But there isn't any coyotes on Vancouver Island. But anyway, yeah, you want to keep your distance. So if you happen to see one, um, you know, uh, just back away, walk away. Don't turn your back on them. Just sort of walk backwards, making sure that you're safe by walking backwards, but you can keep an eye on them. Wolves likely will not, other than that black one that I talked about because it was being fed. If that wasn't being fed, she would have been lucky to have seen that, and it would have just probably gone back into the forest. Coyotes are a little bit different animal in that coyotes are quite comfortable living with people in cities. A lot of food in cities. There's pets. Unfortunately, there's raccoons. There's garbage and whatever. So the coyotes tend to have a bit more of a interest in going up to people. So again, you don't want to run. You don't want to run from a coyote or a wolf because all that does is trigger the prey response and they're going to chase you. So hopefully, for the Nature Kids BC here, that when you're out and about like that you're with an adult, make a lot of noise, scare them, to chase them away. And, generally that will achieve what you want. You just have to be careful, like in Stanley Park, I know where the coyotes are denning. You don't want to, they I think will close off that area of Stanley Park so you don't walk the trails and you're walking right into their den area. And yeah, then they're going to come and tell you to leave. The coyotes, that is. Right. I think there was another question there too, wasn't there? I saw it on the
Yeah,
bottom.
we have someone wondering when the first coastal wolf was discovered.
Well, I guess from the First Nations perspective, they knew that the coastal wolves were there, for a long time. When I talked early at the beginning, when Rain Coast Conservation Foundation was doing their study, um, they they were one of the first ones, to know that, to realize that there was some different wolves up there. So they were, so that's, like 25 years ago that they went up there and they found that, that there were wolves up there and they were the coastal wolves. So from a Western science perspective, because that would be those biologists that were studying, that's what we call Western science as compared to the traditional knowledge that the First Nations have. It's fairly recent, only 25 years or so.
Thanks, Gary. And Kathleen has a question. She says, many of the sightings of wolves on the coast are lone wolves. So did coastal wolves not hunt in packs like interior wolves? If so, what are the skills they use when hunting alone?
Okay. First of all, um, when we see a wolf by itself, it's not a lone wolf. Okay. Um, many times they are with a pack, but they're not necessarily with pack mates at that time. So I just caution people to not to think that they are lone wolves, because that's a really tough um, existence for a wolf. They may just not be with their pack mates, but they join up with their pack mates. Um, and that. So yes, coastal wolves do hunt in packs, just like the wolves in the interior. And they but they also will, you may see only one or so that's out on the beach and um, foraging. Its mates, pack mates, maybe in the bush that they're going to join up with. There's a really interesting picture of a coastal wolf. It's in Ian McAllister's book. It's called The Last Wild Wolves. And it's sort of like a big coffee table book with lots of pictures. There's a picture of a female wolf there that they call Three Legs. And she has, I believe it's her back right leg, but it's a rear leg, has been broken. It's permanently broken, probably kicked by a deer or something. And so she goes around on three legs. And she lives with that pack because what she does is she takes care of the pups and the yearlings. And so she can do things like, when they're eating salmon during the salmon runs in the fall, like now, she can catch a salmon on three legs, but you're not going to catch a deer on three legs, or, probably for that matter, you're not going to bring down a black bear. So they hunt black bear in packs, but what they do is they share the food with her, and so she can live playing that role of sort of the wolf caretaker for the pups and the yearlings. That would not happen in the interior of BC, just because they're so much more mobile, and she would get left behind, and other predators would get her. Um, so those are similar skills that they use, both on the coast as well as the interior. It just so happens that on the coast, the prey density is probably more concentrated in smaller areas than it is on the in the interior. Just so that the wolves in the interior are going to have larger territories to have a big enough prey base to survive.
And we've got one more question in the chat, and that's from Jessica and her family. They're wondering how you got into the work that you do, Gary.
Well, yeah, I get that question a lot, and it's a good question. When I was a student, and this is many, many decades ago, there was a book called Never Cry Wolf, written by Farley Mowat. I actually have a picture of Farley Mowat that's signed by him. And that book, actually, he wrote that book in sort of the early 1960s. So he studied them up in what was the Northwest Territories. And so Farley autographed the picture and that, because I told him what I did with Tundra. And so that was my interest in terms of wolves, because this book, even though some people, say, well, you made some of the stuff up, it actually has been verified by some of the wolf biologists. It was the first book or really study of wolves and that. So anyway, it was part of the curriculum in high school. I'd always had dogs, and in the around 2003, I got my first wolf dog. And this animal was part wolf, about 50% wolf and 50% dog. And then I got Tundra. Here's, if you can see Tundra there. So Tundra, I got her from a breeder, and I'm not encouraging people to go out and get these. These are not family pets, okay? The Tundra, I got it from a breeder in Alberta. She was 3 weeks of age when I got her, and you got to get them at 3 weeks of age because that's when they're going to bond with you. And so I had a bottle feeder and whatever. Um, Tundra was just such an incredible animal, so graceful, so beautiful, so gentle, and people wanted to see her. So I then started to, well, at 3 months of age, we on the island that I lived on, the local Boy Scouts, I guess they're called beavers or whatever. They wanted me to bring Tundra, which I did. And Tundra basically wanted to hide under the pews and that in this hall and that. But at 9 months, 10 months, I took her to her first school. I just gently allowed her to be comfortable doing it, and she was. The students and the teachers now were so gentle with her, and no loud noises, no moving and scaring her, and then it just unfolded and evolved after that to the point, as I said, we did 300 schools and that. And what I talked about was the importance of wolves in the ecosystem and a lot about the First Nations view of the wolf, which is quite different from their culture to our culture. The Europeans were, not all of us, but, many, they fear the wolf. They want to kill the wolf and that. I always told them that Tundra was not a family pet. So I didn't want them going home, after, the school and say, yeah, mom, I got to pet a wolf, which they did. I mean, she was that gentle, and she never once showed her teeth, never once bit a child, never once growled at a child, never had her hackles up and that. And I didn't want them going home and saying, mom and dad, I want to get a wolf, which obviously a number of them did, but I was very clear on that, and I just continued to do it. Tundra lived to be 15 years and almost 3 months. She passed away on June the 5th, 2022. She was just so beautiful. I didn't want to bury her, couldn't cremate her, so I had a local taxidermist here in Nanaimo make her into a full mount, and people who come can see Tundra. She's in my heart every day, and I get to see her every day. So I still do that work. If some of the, and I know Caitlin has mentioned this, or maybe she'll put it out, if some of the individual Nature Kids groups, I want to, locally, if they can always come and visit, and I can do, Zoom ones for your group. So that's what I do.
Thanks, Gary. That was great. Lots of great information on wolves and what we can do to protect them and how we can support conservation. And yeah, we really love the work that you've done in getting the message out because, yeah, I know in the interior, there's still quite a few people who don't understand the importance of wolves in the ecosystem and how they keep the balance. So it's definitely a message that needs to continue to be out there. So thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining this morning on your Saturday morning. And yeah, late next week, I'll be sending out an email with lots of great wolf resources, and we'll have the recording eventually up on our YouTube channel. So yeah, we're super excited to have you this morning. And thanks again, Gary, so much for volunteering your time to share all your knowledge with us. And our next Virtual Explorer Day will be in November. So it's up on our events calendar on our website. You can check that out. It's with Sierra Club BC. And enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully you'll get some sunshine. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you again next time.
Okay. Bye-bye, Caitlin.
Thanks, Gary.
You're welcome. My pleasure.